You're listening to Docs Outside the Box, Episode 2. I'm getting used to this.
Welcome to Docs Outside the Box podcast. This is your official show, looking inside the minds of cutting-edge and innovative doctors. Think you'll find these stories in any medical textbook? Sorry, you're getting real life insight from men and women pushing the envelope beyond medicine. Ordinary doctors doing extraordinary things. Let's start now with your host, Dr. Nee Darko.
Welcome back, everyone. Welcome back. I'm fired up. I'm excited for a couple of reasons. One, you decided to come back and listen to the second episode. But also, two, I have an exciting guest that I want to showcase for you. Her name is Dr. Melanie Watkins. She's a psychiatrist who's practicing in the state of California. I've been following Melanie for quite some time on Twitter. She's been known to have very poignant Twitter messages, whether they be motivational in aspect, but more importantly, encompassing the whole aspect of mental health. And as anybody who's following her can see, she's got her hand in multiple different things. Truly, she is living outside the box. So I decided to take a reacher and try to contact her to see if she'd want to be a guest on the show. And she said yes, and the rest is history. So just a brief introduction. She is a board certified psychiatrist in California, but she's also an author. She's published short stories in various publications like Chicken Soup for the Single Soul. She's also done Chicken Soup for the African American Soul. But I think she's more known for being an author of her memoir, which is called Taking My Medicine, which you can get right now on Amazon. But it's about basically her challenges along her path from being a single mom in high school to basically overcoming some of those challenges as well as stigmas and becoming a board certified psychiatrist as you know her today. Besides an author, she's also a motivational speaker. She's also a social media expert, guru. And at one point, she was also a podcaster. So she's got a lot of information that I think you all would like to learn something from. But some of the things that I want you all to grasp from this interview are I want you to learn about the unique way in which she practices. She's both employed and then she also practices as an independent contractor. And then also one thing that I think may apply to all of y'all and that you may be interested in knowing about is what are some of the biggest contract negotiation traps that physicians fall into. Also, some other things that I think we can pick up on is how social media has played a major role in her success. And then also at the same time, us as physicians, what are we doing for our own mental health? We seem to always be concerned about the patient, but as you all know, life as a doctor can be very stressful. So she talks about things that we can do to make ourselves a lot healthier from the mental aspect. So without further ado, I'm going to give you Dr. Melanie Watkins. So Dr. Melanie Watkins, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm doing very good. I'm freezing my butt off here over on the East Coast. I know you're over in the West Coast where it's in the mid 70s, 80s right now?
It's pretty nice over here.
Well, I can tell you I'm jealous right now. So look, before we go ahead and get really started on the podcast and the interview, why don't you tell us a little bit of where you're from and what med school you went to and so forth?
Sure. So I was born in LA, grew up in Phoenix, and went to a lot of different high schools, which we'll talk about later on, and why that was that I went to so many different high schools, which became part of my story. I've lived all over the U.S. After high school, I went to undergrad at the University of Nevada in Reno. And then I went to Stanford Medical School. And after that, I completed an internship at the University of California, San Francisco in obstetrics and gynecology. And I realized that my true passion was psychiatry and decided to move back to Reno, Nevada, and did a 3-year residency in psychiatry. And then I decided to move back to the Bay Area where I've been ever since.
Wow. So you've been basically zigzagging through the through the West Coast.
Yes, in fact, even when I was a resident in Reno, Nevada, I was doing some moonlighting in Berkeley, California. I kept my California license that I received during my intern year and decided to keep that active. And so, even though I was living in Reno, I decided to do some moonlighting in California. And also, I decided to start doing some locums work when I was a resident and did some moonlighting in Southern California as well. So that was very nice.
So I hear that getting a California license takes what, over a year, maybe even longer. Is
It
that
takes some
true?
time. I don't know about that. It's funny because that was so many years ago that I got my California license. So I don't know if perhaps things have changed now because that was back in 2003.
Oh, okay. Well, so you briefly said that you did residency initially as OB-GYN. And then you said you had a little change, well, not a little, but you had a big change of heart and went into, psychiatry. And I can't think of two more diametrically opposed specialties, you know? So tell us about like what happened. When did you decide that, hey, you're doing OB, or excuse me, yeah, you're doing OB and this is just not working for you and you decide to do psychiatry? Make us a fly on the wall.
Yes, yes. Well, it's interesting because when I was in high school, that's what I wanted to do. I saw myself being an OBGYN and helping women, especially young women, make good reproductive choices and being an advocate for them. And I liked the idea of delivering babies. I was very young, in high school. And then in college, it was what I was really focused on. And in medical school as well, starting a lot of programs and opportunities for my classmates and working with OBGYNs at Stanford and at UCSF. And that was my mission. Like, that's what I was going to do. But then when I started my internship year, I realized that it was a lot more surgery than what I thought it was going to be. And also, too, I didn't enjoy the surgery as much. When you're a medical student.
What? Come on now.
Yeah, no.
I'm talking to a surgeon now. Come on.
Yeah, well, yeah. Well, it's funny because when you're a medical student, obviously you're doing more retracting and so forth. You're not right in there, right? And so the further along you go in your training, you're getting more and more responsibility. And I just didn't like doing the vag hiss as much as I thought I was going to. And what I really love, to be honest with you, I love the clinic. And I really enjoyed
What?
Yes. And my co-residents would just crack up because instead of being in the ER or the OR, I wanted to be in the clinic. I wanted to talk with patients about, logistical issues they were having with keeping their appointments, their psychosocial issues. Are you feeling safe at home? And so, the medical assistants would say, Dr. Watkins, the clinic, I got all these charts backed up, you don't have enough time to spend that much time with patients. And so, I felt like there was a lot of pressure just to keep going, keep going, keep going. And so that was like my first epiphany. And then, I was looking at these attendings who I just respected and admired so, so much, but they were working so hard. And there were more and more discussions about liability issues. Neurosurgeons and OBGYNs pay the highest malpractice premiums out of all the specialties. And I was just thinking, oh my gosh, I've always been a very creative, think outside the box. Like the title of your
She's stealing my show.
Outside the box. And so, I felt that OBGYN, practicing it the way that I was thinking of practicing it, would limit me in a lot of ways. That I always would be tied to a hospital, that I would always be, looking over my shoulder and worrying about being sued. Because there was a saying that we had, it wasn't a matter of if you'd be sued, but just when, in OBGYN. And so, I talked with my co-residents about it and attendings, and everyone's, oh gosh, Melanie, internship year is hard for everyone. Second year is going to be better. Well, second year came and I was like, oh my gosh, this is worse than first year because I had more responsibilities, right, as a second year. And I really enjoyed teaching. There wasn't a time to, I got a teaching award when I was an intern, and I really, really enjoyed teaching. And there wasn't a time to teach the medical students, the interns, and then all the responsibilities that the chief was putting on me, and just feeling really, really caught. And I remember being on night float. We were on night float for 6 weeks, and night float was very, very tough. And we had a field demise, a really, really sad outcome. And I remember the next morning talking about the case and feeling just very rushed and unsupported. And it's just really the nature of, part that's residency. It is what it is. But feeling like, wow, we are really not talking about what happened. And I'm not really feeling like there's much space for me to talk about how this is affecting me. And so I decided to take a leave of absence. And during that time, I tried to figure out what I wanted to do. Did I want to do family practice? Did I want to do OBGYN, maybe a community program that was less, academic? And I was just trying to do some soul searching. And that's when a friend of mine said, we just had a second-year position open up in psych here in Reno. And I said, psych? I'm like, aren't those doctors kind of, I don't know, sometimes you can't tell who's the doctor and who's the patient,
Who's running the asylum, basically, right?
Right. And so I think that many people have misperceptions about mental health in general, mental illness, and also there's stigma with the folks who practice psychiatry, which I realized, And when I first started it, I thought, is this really for me? Because my pager was so quiet. I thought, gosh, is it broken? Like, my pager's not going off. What's going on here?
This is now
when I started
into psychiatry.
Yes. When I started psych residency, I was like, did I make the right decision? This is very quiet. I don't know if it's the right pace for me. But then I realized, wow, this is exactly what I'm meant to be doing. I love the variety. I kind of felt like a family practice stock in psychiatry. Like every rotation, I was like, wow, I loved it. I loved consultation liaison. I loved the clinic. I loved providing therapy. I loved learning more about psychopharmacology. I love child and adolescent. I loved addiction. And so I thought, oh my gosh, what am I going to do after residency? Because do I do fellowship? I can't decide on just one thing. And so I realized psychiatry was really such a better fit for me and really allowed me more space and opportunity and freedom to pursue all the interests that I had.
Okay. Well, one thing that we haven't covered yet is, and I think this is, you would say, a big part of your life, is you were in high school and you got pregnant.
Yes.
And you're actually very open about your story of being a teenage mom, of raising your son, Jonathan, to the point where you wrote a book about it. But before we get to the part about where you wrote a book, tell us a little bit about the stigma that you had to overcome in college, in medical school, and definitely in residency as being a single mother.
Oh, yes, definitely a lot of concerns with stigma. And when I was very young, when I was a pregnant 16-year-old, there was a lot of shame. And that's something that people don't really talk about, the immense amount of shame that many young pregnant teens experience, because sometimes their families have certain expectations and there's disappointment. And then society.
There was the huge push in the 90s for teenage pregnancy. I don't know if you remember it. Well, obviously you went through that, but I still remember all of the PSAs on TV.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And I actually wrote about that in my book because I went to a clinic and there was a poster that said having a child is like being grounded for 18 years. It was this picture of this, African-American young mom with a crying baby. And that was in the clinic where I found out I was pregnant. And so, you can imagine. I mean, this public service announcement is supposed to help, young people think twice about becoming pregnant. But for those who had already had a pregnancy or were parenting, these messages were horrible to see. And it's like, wow, this is really what society thinks that I'm capable of doing, that I'm just going to be stuck and I'm going to have another baby and I'm not going to be able to complete my education. My child isn't going to be able to do well and pursue education. And so, that really contributed to the stigma and the shame. And even in the 2000s in New York, there were public service campaigns about teen pregnancy, and a group of young mothers got together and said, you know what, we're fighting this. We don't like the message that this sends. It does nothing to really change, the numbers and statistics as far as, how many young people actually, do end up having, teen pregnancies. And it makes it worse for people who've already had made these decisions and are already parenting, as a young adult. So I'm glad that more and more is being done to address that, because a lot of people don't think about what the young mom experiences. And then, people see when, a young person out there, they see you're young and they're quick to share their opinion about who they think you are, that you're using resources and that you're, what a shame that you're a bad mother, and I wrote about that in my book, what it was like to be a young mom and be out there with my, baby bag, backpack, stroller, and Jonathan waiting for the bus. And all the looks that I would get, they didn't know I was on my way, to college, they just saw a young mom with a baby and had some ideas as far as what I was doing, and really had no idea what I was really up to, what I really wanted for my future and for my son's future.
Literally judging you by a cover.
Yes, yes.
Now, in terms of once you were in medical school, how did you balance? I mean, that had to be an amazing or a tough work-life balance, studying anatomy class, but at the same time caring for your son. How did you do that?
Yeah, it was extremely difficult. But you know what? It taught me resourcefulness. It really, really did. And I didn't have any family in Palo Alto. I didn't know anyone. And so I basically had to create a support system. And the people who were so helpful to me during medical school were some of my professors. Just like in college, they became a surrogate family for me. And some of the graduate students who lived on campus, especially their wives, their partners, would help me out with childcare. And then as the clinical years approached, I thought, gosh, how am I going to be able to, be at the hospital for 30 hours? Childcare is usually just, maybe 6:30 or 7 a.m. until, after school time and or after work time till 6 or so. But, when you're in the hospital, as you have to be there as a medical student. You can't say, oh, sorry, I got to go. I got to go pick up my kid. So I needed childcare for overnight, for weekends, right? And so it's pretty funny. One of my friends who didn't have children at the time, she said, oh, Melanie, you should just take out loans and get a nanny. I said, a nanny? There is no way I could afford to get a nanny, and I don't want to take out the amount of money that I would need to take out in loans to have a nanny. But she did make me think about something. I thought, gosh, Jonathan's father was never involved in Jonathan's life. And I talked about that in my book too. And, I really wanted him to have positive male role models. And so what I decided to do was put an ad in the Palo Alto newspaper. And I was looking for a nanny, preferably a man, actually, a young man who would be interested in being a basic childcare provider for my son, and who would live with us as a boarder. I take care of room and board.
Young Mr. Doubtfire or something?
Kind of like that. Yes, yes. And so it was so funny. It really, really worked out well. I ended up having two, I called them nannies, male nannies, during my clinical years. Each stayed for a year. And it was wonderful. It turned out so well, better than I could have ever imagined. And Jonathan had these great male role models, and they would go to sporting events. And one of them really liked to cook and had a great girlfriend who was so sweet to Jonathan as well. And these wonderful relationships formed. And so, for me, that was just like, wow, really, you have to be creative when you're a single parent. You really, really have to be resourceful, and you have to just know that there's going to be a way. My faith is very important to me. And I felt that, God wouldn't have taken me this far for me to fail at this point. I'm so close to finishing medical school. I have these clinical years coming up. It's like, there's got to be a solution. There's got to be a way. And so it worked out really, really well for Jonathan, for the Mannies, and for me.
So you've been thinking outside the box since you've been 17, 18?
Yes, exactly.
Mm-hmm. I mean, most of the doctors that we're going to feature in the show probably are making these decisions and these epiphanies, into while they're in residency or even afterwards. So you were forced to make these decisions and think outside at least a conventional way of thinking at a very young age.
Yes, yes. And obviously, too, that stayed with me for many, many years, just knowing there's other ways to do things, which is what really resonated. Talking with you, that your message really resonated with me, because there are not too many of us who think that there are other ways to solve problems and to have the kind of life that we want to have and provide the patient care that we want to provide. I think that many of us are just trained to look at medicine a certain way. After high school, there's college, and college there's medical school. To medical school, there's internship and residency and maybe fellowship, and then you practice medicine until you're 65, 70, or forced to retire, and that's it. We don't really talk about other ways of doing things.
So when did those thoughts start coming into a young Dr. Melanie Watkins' brain? Was this something that you were thinking about during residency before that point?
Actually medical school, and it was such a blessing to go to Stanford because it was so much more than going to a great medical school. It's being surrounded by people who were very unconventional, very different. And so I think that I felt more comfortable in being creative because I was just surrounded by classmates who were very creative, just being in Silicon Valley and knowing medical students who are trying to start a startup, during medical school, or getting their MPH or getting their JD or PhD while they were in medical school, doing interesting research all over the world, just really novel ways of doing things. And so that really got me thinking, wow, what could I do? Who are the people that I would need to get in contact with to make, these things happen? And so that just really opened up my eyes. And I think that that's an important message and life lesson, is surrounding yourself with people who also think about the world in a different way. Because I think that part of what happens with us when we're in training is we're surrounded by people who just think a certain way. And this is all that you know. And you just don't really think about all the other options. But being at Stanford and being in Silicon Valley and getting all of this input from all these different sources and creative ways of doing things, it's like, wow. And then also, too, I will say, and many medical schools are starting to do this now, we have the option of spending 5 years in medical school versus 4. And for that 5th year, we only paid 10% of our usual tuition. And there are at least 3 other schools that are doing this now, if not more. But it was a really nice way to give us more time to be creative and to do different things. And so I think that helped a lot, having that extra year to think about what it was I really, really wanted to do, what I was passionate about.
So you're very open about the story of becoming a teenage mom and raising Jonathan. When did you decide that I needed to get this message out to others and I wanted to write a book about it?
Yeah, well, I've always enjoyed journaling. When I was a little girl, I read The Diary of Anne Frank. And
yeah.
I really enjoyed that book so much. It really touched me. And I wanted to have a diary just like she had her diary, Kitty. I wanted to have my diary and would write in my diary, and then I would tear it up and write it in and tear it up because I was so afraid that someone would read it. Right. And so I kind of jokingly say sometimes to folks that when I got older and after I got pregnant, I didn't tear it up anymore because I was like, oh, well, secret's out now. So if my mom or anyone else reads it, they know my deepest, darkest secrets.
Right. Mm-hmm.
But, it was really my way of healing and processing and working through things. And I remember being a pregnant 16-year-old and writing in my journal that, I'm going to be doing some amazing things. I don't quite know what it is, but I want to share my story. I want to show other people that they can be successful. And this was me, pregnant, 16, stressed, not knowing what I was going to be doing exactly. But I just felt like, there must be some greater mission or benefit to all of this, because I was going through just so much hardship. And I thought, I'm going to write a story. I'm going to be someone who is going to be a role model for others. I have to do this for myself, for my baby, and for other people.
And this came out 2010, correct?
Yes. So wrote the memoir. I decided to self-publish it. It's interesting how self-publishing has changed over the years. There used to be a lot of stigma with that.
Oh, yeah. Those days are gone.
Those days are gone. And it's amazing, too, for me, the whole process of being able to write what I wanted to write, and, changing whatever I wanted to change with the book, whether I wanted to change the cover or, change a few chapters, super easy to do. And, also receiving more of the money back. You've heard these stories of people who've had these major publishers, and there's a lot of, pressure to, market yourself and be out there and promote the book, and getting, very little in terms of, your return back for all the hard work that you've put in the book. And so it's really nice to be able to have this book and speak, all over the nation and share my story. And I'm able to, reap some of the reward financially directly from the people that I'm selling the books to.
Okay.
And I can change the price whenever I want. So let me give you an example. So I'll speak at churches or schools, and I'll say, okay, for adults, the book is $15, and for students, the book is $10. And I had this gentleman come up to me. He was so cute. He was in his late 60s, and he said, I'm a student. I want the student rate. I said, okay. He's like, here's my ID. And he pulled out his ID from the local community college. Oh my God, I just loved it. I said, I want to take a picture with you. This is great. Yeah, student rate for you. I love that you're still pursuing your education and learning. And so I was really touched by that.
Hey, discount's a discount,
Yes.
You know?
But with a traditional publisher, the price is on the book, you don't really have a lot of leeway.
Absolutely. So, do you think that because you went the self publishing route, my thoughts of self publishing have definitely changed. But for some reason, I always had this initial thought of basically you pushing around your book. You have a bunch of books in your trunk, and you're basically selling them out of the back of your car. Is it like that, or tell us what it's like to go to self publishing route?
No, not at all. What's great is it's better for garage space and better for the environment that we do print on demand now. Totally different, right? So yeah, back in the day, people would have like 1,000
You like that
copies
picture,
of
right?
their books in like their living room or something, and their poor partner or child would say, "Oh my gosh, there's no space. We have all these books. Like, they have to be stored somewhere." I ordered 1,000 books, but nowadays, what's so amazing is with self-publishing, it's print on demand. So if someone comes across you online and they're interested in your book, they can just go to Amazon or to your own special link for your book, for your site, your website, and they can order the book, and basically the company will, print it, put it together, and ship it. So you don't have to worry about that. And then also, too, what I do when I'm speaking, like I had a speaking engagement in Alaska, and there was no way I was lugging some books up to Alaska. So what I do when I'm speaking somewhere else outside of the state is I will have the books shipped from the company ahead of time, and they will be there waiting for me. And then whatever books I don't sell, I just have them shipped right back, back home to Walnut Creek. And then, I just have very few amount of books. I may have probably about 50 books or so in my home office, but that's it. I don't need more books with me because most of my speaking engagements are not local nowadays. And so that's great. Yeah, print on demand, better for the environment and better for space in general.
Now you mentioned your speaking engagements. What topic are you normally being booked for, or what do you normally get asked to speak about?
Yeah, so usually motivation and mental health. And so when I say motivation, I'm usually sharing a bit about my story being a teen mom and becoming resilient, and discussing with primarily young people what it is like to be resilient and how do you deal with the obstacles that inevitably any of us will face, on our journey. And so that's one of the main topics I really enjoy talking about. And then the second topic that I'm asked to talk about is mental health and mental illness. What does it mean to maintain good mental health, and what does it mean to have mental illness, and how do we find the resources available for this vulnerable population? How do we take care of those who take care of those who have mental illness, right? So I speak to the caregivers. I speak to NAMI, the National Alliance for Mental Illness. I really enjoy doing that kind of work because there's a lot that needs to be done to help this population. And, many of them can't speak up for themselves. They're experiencing such significant symptoms, whether that be severe depression, anxiety, psychosis, substance use, that it's very hard for them to advocate for themselves. And so it's really nice to be in a position to, teach others how to be an advocate for them, and also helping people to, be aware and recognize what is mental illness and to decrease the stigma. And so I'm very passionate about that. And I enjoy talking about those topics.
Now, you currently, right now, are you employed or are you an independent contractor?
That's a very interesting question. So,
and the reason I'm asking is, with you doing all of these different speaking engagements, do you find that, you're kind of there's almost like a dichotomy where you're on one end, you have clinical medicine, and the other end, you have, some responsibilities that you have to do to your patients, or even to your employer if you are employed? Do you find that hard to balance? Or if you're an independent contractor, maybe you don't have to worry about that at all?
Yeah, so I'm actually both. So I work for a company that has contracts all over the state of California, and I have benefits through that company, and it's almost like locums work, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. But I am an employee through that company. But then I'm also an independent contractor as far as my speaking engagements and my private practice.
Okay. So tell us about that, because I think we all want to know. So you have a private practice as a psychiatrist,
Hmm.
right? And then you're also employed as a psychiatrist also?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. Tell us more.
Yes.
We want to know.
Yes. So it's interesting. So to tell you the full story, we have to go back to 2011 or so. And
Let's do it.
yes, yes. So I just finished publishing my memoirs, really excited about that. And I just started private practice, and I was working full time at a county hospital for a company. And it was interesting because what was happening at this county hospital is there was a tremendous amount of turnover. They had a lot of locums docs coming in and out. And it was very frustrating for, as you can imagine, for the patients, for the staff, like every week or every month, there'd be a new doctor showing up. And
There's no follow up.
yes, yes. And very hard too with mental health in particular, right? So the person who started this company was just brilliant. He's a psychologist, and he decided to recruit psychiatrists to work at these county facilities in California who were, having such a hard time getting regular, consistent doctors. And so I decided to work for the company. And so the company actually provided benefits for me. So I wasn't technically a county employee. I was an employee of the company. Well, in 2011, I read a book that changed my life, totally changed my perspective. And it was called The 4-Hour Work Week.
Oh, yes.
Yes, by Tim Ferriss. Yes.
Audience members, go get that book right now.
Yes, yes, yes. And it's also an audiobook too, which I do a lot of listening. I love audible.com. And so, but this is a book that you'll also want to have in your hands physically, because you will be underlining, highlighting, bending pages, tabbing. It is such a good book. And so I was thinking, wow, there's got to be another way to live the life that I want to live and not feel like I'm getting more and more burnout, because medicine's really changing, as you know. And I was feeling more kind of like a highly paid widget worker, like I was replaceable.
Cog in a wheel.
Yeah,
Cog in a wheel.
yes, and I didn't like that. I didn't like the fact that I felt replaceable, because I felt like there's something very unique that I bring as a psychiatrist who's, a person of color and young and very creative and just very much a strong advocate for patients. I hated the idea like I could just be replaced. It's not a big deal, and blah, blah, blah. And so I thought, I've got to find something different to do, because this isn't really, really what I want to be doing for the rest of my life. And so what I realized is that the company was growing. It was becoming more challenging for the company to find docs to cover for the main doctors who wanted to have time off or vacation time, what have you. And so I thought, you know what? I can be that doctor to cover for other doctors in the company. I'm a people person. I know how to jump in. I know how to adapt. I will be the vacation relief doctor, and I will cover when other doctors are out or sick, what have you. And it was just a brilliant solution. It was a win-win. The founder of the company thought it was a great idea. I thought, gosh, this way I'll get the variety that I want, and I can get the time off when I want, right? So basically, I would just say, okay, I'm available these dates, but I'm not available these dates. And then I'd be able to have the freedom to travel when I wanted to travel. Now, of course, I'd make less money. If I was taking a lot of time off, I wanted to also be, available to the company. And I also negotiated benefits. I said, even though I'm not working full time, I still want medical, dental, I want my same benefits. And they went for it because they saw the value in what I was proposing, because they were really struggling. Like, how can you say that you can work for our company and you can have this amount of time off, but then when the doctors would request time off, who was going to cover? Because the company was growing and growing and growing. And so this.
Now, I think what's really interesting about what you said is that it's not like this opportunity fell from the sky. It sounds like you created this, and you created the buy-in from, the other people, or at least from your employer, so that they can jump along this idea.
Yes. Yeah, he thought it was very smart. And I just, all I did was I just stayed open. I was looking at what's going on. I'm like, the company's really, really growing. And oh my gosh, Dr. Smith wants to take Christmas off or wants to take a week off in April, but there's no one else who's covering for him. What's going on here? And the company was going so quickly. And I thought, I can be that doc. I can be doc in a box for that. So thinking outside the box becomes talking the box.
Thinking outside the box.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I kind of would laugh and say, yeah, I'm docking the box. Just ship me out wherever you need me to practice psychiatry. I'll be there. And two, like I was saying before, it really addressed my need for novelty. Because remember, I was saying how I just enjoyed so many aspects of psychiatry. I could not decide what one thing I wanted to do in psychiatry. And I was
Yeah.
able, doing this position, to do forensic work and do addiction work and do psych ER and to do consultation liaison and to do, assertive community treatment, doing ACT programs and inpatient work and outpatient work, and just do everything that I wanted to do in psychiatry without being stuck in one place.
Okay. Now, with the negotiation process, was it a very smooth process? I mean, this probably was the first time you were negotiating any type of contract. Am I right?
Yes. I had a friend who told me years ago, everything's negotiable. And I didn't really know what he was talking about because I didn't have to negotiate anything. So I was like, what is this?
That's very profound. And it's something that a lot of people don't believe until they actually, have been screwed over a couple of times and they look back and find out that maybe someone who else is working at the same job may have been able to negotiate higher salary or maybe some higher benefits than they have.
Yes, you'd be surprised. It's just like buying an airline ticket. The person seated next to you may have paid half as much as you paid.
I know.
Yeah. So, so the negotiation thing. So basically, and Tim Ferriss talks about this in his book, I really made sure that I had a solid track record before I started negotiating. So, I told him about what I bring to the table and what makes me special and different. I was willing to travel. I've never called in sick, which, may not be such a good thing, but it definitely did speak to my work ethic and that they could always rely on me. I was stable. I was solid. I got along very well with, nursing staff, OT staff, social workers. I work hard. And so I already had that track record, after I was working full time for the company for a while, that he was willing to take that chance on me doing this creative thing because I'd already proven that I was a really strong employee. Okay. And so it can be very hard to start off in a situation where you don't really have anything behind you yet. It's not to say that you can't get all that you want. I mean, you can, but it is really nice to be able to have something that sets you apart, that justifies why you think you're worth this amount. Now, on the flip side of that, I think a lot of doctors, though, discount that, just having the MD or the DO and having gone through all this training, that says something, okay? That says a lot. And then what else? You know what I mean? You'd be amazed how many people I've met, how many professionals have had dings on their records or, left a job in a really nasty situation. I mean, if you don't have any history of being fired, and you don't have any dings on your record, I mean, that's actually a big thing for a company because they're thinking, wow, okay, this is someone that we really, really can trust and doesn't have any history of having, drama.
It's cheaper to insure them also.
Yes, exactly. And so people don't even think about that. Like, I'm just doing what I'm supposed to be doing. I'm just practicing medicine and being a good citizen. Like, that's actually a plus. And people don't even, I know it sounds crazy, but sometimes some of these employers are so desperate to get a doctor in that they're willing to pay more, for a doctor who may not be as good, may not have a squeaky clean record, but they're willing to be here. Okay, that kind of thing. And so, yeah, if your record is squeaky clean, if you've never had any problems, if there's something that sets you apart, that's different, you're willing to work weekends, you're willing to work nights, you're willing to work, some holidays, you're willing to throw that in. You have to kind of sweeten the deal sometimes too, and let them know, wow, okay, this is the value that I'm getting by paying this person, $5,000 more than the last doc per month.
Now, this is a conversation that you're having in person, right?
Well, my last.
Or did you do it over email?
Well, there's pros and cons to that too. I mean, in one way, it's nice to have everything in writing, but then there is a lot to be said for actually having the discussion, on the phone or in person. It really depends who you are too, and how the employer wants to go about doing it. I mean, I'll be honest with you. I'm just going to put it out there. One negotiation that I had, I was tearing up, and I'm glad that it was on the phone because they couldn't tell. It was so hard for me to stay present and even all the pushback I was getting, because the thing is, it's very intimidating, and just real talk, I'm being honest with you. It's very intimidating when you're a doctor and you know medicine so well inside and out, but you're working with business people who know the language of business. They've taken years of negotiation classes, and they know this stuff inside and out. They know the responses to every possible, question.
You're at a huge disadvantage.
Yes.
And that's real talk from me.
Yes. And
Yeah.
so I'm here trying to advocate for myself while also being respectful, right? Because you don't want to put off someone. But I started kind of, and I'm not a big crier, I started kind of tearing up, like this is really, really challenging. But I had to fight. I had to fight for myself and for my family. That's money that could be used for my son who's in college. I'm negotiating for that money,
Yeah. And I think it's interesting you say that, because I feel like we're not allowed to have that type of discussion, at least outside or outward. Like we can have that discussion in our own mind or even among, our colleagues, but being able to express that, hey, listen, I'm going to be able to provide great care to my, patients, but also at the same time, what's wrong with saying, hey, look, I want to be reimbursed for it, or I feel like I need to get benefit A, benefit B, benefit C. Now, I may not be able to get all of the benefits, but we can have a discussion that goes beyond just patient care.
Yes. That's the thing. You're never going to get anything you don't ask for.
Right.
Okay. So don't make the decision for yourself. I'd rather put more out there and get, maybe at A, B, and C, but I didn't get C and D, versus not putting out there at all. And I'm just getting what everyone else got because I didn't speak up for myself. Oh, it would have been nice to have this gym membership included, but I didn't even know I could ask for that, that kind of thing.
Well, don't you currently right now, you have Uber, an Uber driver worked into your contract. I was shocked to hear that. Tell us about that.
Yes. So I was asked to work at a place that is, with no traffic, it's 30 minutes, okay? But with traffic, it's over an hour. And so this particular facility, I just knew that sitting in that traffic, going there, back and forth, I just knew it would wear me out. And I thought, you know what? I would love to have an Uber driver. And I thought, maybe I'm just going to just ask, it doesn't hurt to ask, and it's funny because I got a lot of pushback for that, as you can imagine, and lots of interesting responses as far as why they couldn't do that and how I could take public transportation, which is our BART, our train system here, or how I could leave earlier, or blah, 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 blah. They had a response for everything. And I just said, like a broken record kind of thing. We call it the broken record technique in psych. I just repeated the same thing over and over again. I'm not going to be able to do the quality of work that I want to do if I don't have a driver. This is what I need. I understand what you're saying. However, I'm not going to be able to work at that site if I don't have a driver. I know you're saying I could get up earlier. I know you're saying that, yeah, you might pay me back for gas, but I'm not going to be able to do this work.
Without someone physically driving.
Right.
You understand.
Because I said, look, and the thing is, too, I told them, like, I don't think that's, and I also said the other things, too, that I was willing to concede on. But this one was so important to me because there's nothing more important than your time. You can't get that time back. And so by having a driver, then I would be able to, read some journal articles, which, again, would be potentially a win for them because I'd be staying up to date on things. I said I'd still be available on the phone, if nursing staff needed me, I would be able just to be more refreshed coming in to do this intense work that, this is going to be very intense work you're asking me to do for this period of time. And I will be in a much better position to do that work well if I have this addressed. And so, again, I was willing to be flexible in some other things or concede some other things, but that I felt very strongly about and was able to do it.
And they said yes.
Yes. And now what's so funny is he's got his own Uber driver. Now he's starting to use Uber. I was like, what?
Yeah, I was completely shocked when you told me about this. I didn't even think, I thought you were joking around at first.
No joke. But that's the thing. Like, I think many of us don't take the time just to sit down and say, what would make this my dream job? What would make this position everything that I really, really want? Okay. We don't take the time to sit down and even have that thought. It's like we're not allowed, right? So for me, back in 2011, 2012, I was thinking, what would make this kind of work with the persistently mentally ill, which is very, very difficult work, what would make this something that, I can be refreshed, ready to go. I would enjoy it. I can do the advocacy work I want to do and still do my speaking engagements and all the other things I want to do. And I thought, you know what? It's having that flexibility. If I can have the flexibility where I can have the time off, or I want to have the time off, then I can really do great work. And so that was, but then also what would make this a dream job would be to have benefits, because I can't let the benefits go. And so I just took the time to sit down and thought about what would make this job ideal for me, that would work for me. It may not work for someone else, but for me, I know what was going to make this ideal. And, I think it's within reason. I mean, again, other people might think, Uber driver, what? That's not reasonable. Hey, it all depends how you present it, and how it can be a win for the other person and for you. And so just spend the time, take the time, what would make my work ideal? Would that be, having an allowance for, more of an educational allowance or more time off, or, having conferences covered, or whatever it is, whatever comes to mind for you, and only you can answer that question. What would I really like to make this a really ideal position for me? And how can I go about asking for it, from a place of strength, a place of knowing your worth, your value, and what could I concede on? What could I use as a bargaining tool with them? What would I be willing to let go? You don't want to be difficult, right? No one wants to work with someone who's really, really, really difficult. You want to be flexible and open, but you also want to assert yourself and speak up for what you need.
I mean, it's a give and take.
Yes, it is. It is.
I mean, that's a great point, and I hope the audience members catch on to that. That's something I definitely learned in all of the negotiations that I've done recently. And your point actually is a great segue into my next question. So what do you think are some of the biggest contract traps that physicians fall into?
Well, not talking with colleagues about it, I mean, here we are talking. This is a great discussion. I'm hoping that it opens the doors for more people to have this discussion, because people are very secretive. Very secretive. And, I, in my experience covering for other docs, I got to know a lot of other doctors, and I was able to talk with them a bit about their experiences with negotiating and the differences in what other people were getting. And so this is a little bit taboo for some folks, but, if you can talk with some other colleagues, it can really make a difference. You'd be surprised at the difference. People don't want to talk about those things, right? They don't want to talk about it.
It's like, but that thought process is almost to our disadvantage.
Yes,
actually, right?
yes. People don't want to talk about what each other, what everyone's making or what benefits and so forth. People are very secretive. And then if you don't know what's possible or what's open to you, it's really a detriment, because you're not going to be able to know what's possible that you could be asking for. So that's the first thing that comes to mind. Another thing is, there are some people who will run contracts by lawyers, which could be helpful, but you really want a lawyer who knows a bit about medicine. I mean, ideally someone who has some experience with the type of work that doctors really do, really what it's like in the trenches, and knowing what the potential obstacles can be. But not just any old lawyer. You just don't want to go to just anyone and have them look at a contract. You really want someone who has worked with doctors and knows more about what all is involved. And that lawyer too, if that lawyer has that experience, he or she might be able to help you thinking about some things to put in the contract or to ask for that you may not have thought of based on their previous experience with other doctors, right?
Like an Uber driver.
Yes.
Let's just be honest.
Yeah,
I'm just saying.
yeah.
Yeah.
So I would say those two things. Yeah, not talking with colleagues, and also not, running the contract by, a lawyer, someone who has some experience with this.
And they can be very expensive also, I think. So it's important to find the right lawyer.
Well, that's
and
the
I think
thing. If more doctors are open and talking about this stuff, then Dr. Smith can tell Dr. Joe, hey, I worked with this great attorney, and he was able to look at the contract and brought up this, and that. You might consider working with that attorney. And people don't talk about it. So then we're all kind of like starting from scratch.
Now, do you think that we fall too much into the trap of salary instead of really focusing on other benefits, like maybe health insurance or even hours, call, things of that nature?
Yeah, because people don't even think about that. They don't think about call schedule and weekends and holidays and all. They don't think about that at all. And so the more that we talk about these things, like, wow, I didn't know that was negotiable,
Now, mental health it's woven basically in all of the blogs that you do, Periscopes, your podcast. Taking a 30,000-foot view, do you think we as physicians, do you think we're doing enough for our own mental health?
No, not at all. Not at all. And many of the physician groups that I'm a part of a lot of groups on Facebook and so forth, and just hearing our colleagues talk about the challenges that they're dealing with and the stress that they're experiencing, they're not speaking up for themselves. And I think that we're just so committed to patient care, which is so important. Okay, anyone will tell you I'm such an advocate for my patients, but I feel like I'm such a better advocate for my patients and for my family and for myself because I put my mental health first. So I'm taking the time to do the good self-care, to exercise, to pray, to write in my journal, to do the things that make me, a full person and not just, a doctor, And so I think that for many doctors, they're just kind of, in the grind, just kind of going through the motions and doing it, and then they're not really taking the time to take a few steps back. I'm like, whoa, wait a minute. What's going on here? Am I really happy, fulfilled? What just happened? And major decision makers are making these decisions for us that aren't usually at our best interest. Two of the words that just drive me crazy lately are productivity and provider. It's like, I'm not a provider. I don't want to be rewarded based on productivity. I want my patients to get great patient care, and I want to be fully present and being able to provide that for them. But I'm not a provider. I do that as a doctor, as a physician, and I think that using this terminology and talking about efficiency and productivity and provider and, it's really changing the way we practice medicine. I think like we have to advocate for ourselves and take back medicine, I mean, this is our profession. For many of us, it's a calling, and it's being altered in such a way that it's being seen as business, and that's not for the patient.
Sales. Like we're robots.
Yeah, and that's not right for patients. It's not right, and it's not right for us. People have no idea how many years we've sacrificed in terms of our training, and how the debt and all the other things involved, and how we don't have anyone really advocating for us. And people might think, "Whoa, doctors, you're wealthy and you have this and you have that." No, it's not the way that it may have been in the past. There's so many other factors and decision makers involved that are really keeping us providing the patient care that we want to provide and that our patients deserve. And people need to be aware of that, all the factors at play. It's not just the doctor.
So if I put a crystal ball in front of you and basically asked you, what's next for you? And where do you see yourself? Or what do you think is going to be happening for you in the next, let's say, 5 years?
Yeah, I'm so excited about my future. I can't tell you. I just, I'm excited. I'm excited to see what will happen. I think that what I've been doing and what we've been talking about, I think it's really going to get people to think differently about medicine and about mental health. And I would really love to, be starting programs for, physicians to learn more about good self-care and how to be an advocate for themselves, and also for patients, more resources for patients with severe mental illness, and for people who are like you and me, who, everyday people who might be struggling with perhaps addiction or substance use concerns, that they don't know how to get the resources because they're a professional, and there's that stigma and there's that shame and all the consequences that could be involved with that. So I want to do the work in terms of decreasing the stigma, increasing awareness, and getting more discussion and dialogue going. And I would love to do more speaking. I would love to be a consultant of some sort, with television shows and media and so forth, and talking about how we represent those who have mental illness, in movies and television shows and so forth. Yes, I see a lot of great things. I'm open to whatever opportunities come my way in the future, and I'm also open to creating opportunities that don't exist. Okay.
What would be your advice for someone who's in medical school, someone who's in residency, or even someone who's a pre-med who's thinking they want to be just like you? They want to be the next Dr. Melanie Watkins, and maybe too afraid to take the next leap. What's your best advice for them?
My best advice for them. Well, we've used this word so many times, mentorship, but it is really important. And having virtual mentors and real life mentors. I had so many people who advocated for me, who spoke up for me, who believed in me when I wasn't believing in myself. And so having great role models, I think about, some of the attendings and professors I had when I was younger, just who still stay with me to this day. So I would say finding those, those mentors, those leaders, those guides, and also too, believing in yourself, in your gut, in your core, because sometimes it can be hard when you feel so strongly about something and no one else can really see what you're seeing. Being a teen mom and saying, hey, I'm going to become a doctor, being a young African-American pre-med student with a child and saying, I want to go to Stanford, people just couldn't see it. So I had to see it for myself and believe it so strongly and being resourceful. I tell people you don't have to be the brightest person, but you do have to be resourceful. And people will tell you, I'm one of the most resourceful people that they've ever met, because I know there's always a way. I just have to get in contact with the right person. I just have to, do the research. I just have to, put myself out there. And I know I'm resourceful and I can make things happen. And so I think that's a really important skill, to learn how to be resourceful and how to be resilient, because those obstacles are going to come. Those challenges are going to come. That pushback is going to come. So how are you going to deal with it? How are you going to handle it when you get that? Because it's going to happen. It's inevitable. It's not a sign that you're not supposed to be doing it. It's almost like a sign to prove to yourself how much you want it. Am I going to keep moving and going forward, even though this challenge has presented itself to me? How am I going to grow and move forward from this? How can I use this to my advantage? I'm constantly thinking in that way. And when you have that kind of mindset, you can't help but become successful, right?
So, absolutely.
Yeah.
So this next statement, we're getting towards the end. This next statement is a fill in the blank. I started using this on my Twitter handle at DocsOTB, basically trying to get doctors to understand, or at least to let us know, what are some of the things, interests, goals, dreams, these things that they had in their mind prior to going to medical school, or things that they have right now, or things that they're interested in that define them beyond just being a physician, right? So I present to you the statement, I'm not just a doc, I'm a blank. And you can fill in the blank with whatever. Don't think too hard about it. Just kind of go with it.
Yes. Mother, wife, marathoner, author, speaker, advocate.
Comma. Keep going.
Niece, auntie, creator, entrepreneur, innovator. Yeah, that's how I see myself. Dancer. I love to dance. I love having time to dance. It's very important. I love that.
Well, and I think those are perfect answers. I think it's very important that we acknowledge that we have interests, outside of clinical medicine. I mean, we obviously we chose, medicine, which is our profession, and it's very encompassing, but also at the same time, there are things about us that make, Dr. Melanie Watkins who she is outside of Dr. Melanie Watkins, MD,
Yes.
And, it's very important that we acknowledge that, which leads me to my next thing. And I stole this from another podcast that I like to listen to, which is The School of Greatness from
Lewis Howes.
It's done by Lewis Howes, absolutely. I wanted to take the moment to basically acknowledge you for what you're doing, particularly with taking a path that basically was untraveled and going through the struggles and the stigmas that you went through with raising Jonathan and making it all the way into medical school and residency and being successful. And then from that standpoint onwards, being able to take that information and impart it to other people and let them learn from your trials and your tribulations. So I think you're doing an amazing job. I think you're a wonderful mother. I think it's amazing what you're doing with your blogs and your periscopes. So I just wanted to acknowledge you for everything that you've accomplished.
Oh, thank you for that. I appreciate that.
Thank you so much for being on the show. I'm really glad that you are on the show. I think our audience members are much better for hearing this. So thank you.
Yes, you're very welcome. And I really hope that they put some of these things into action and consider taking that time, taking a few steps back and taking the time to think, what would make my work more fulfilling? What would make this my dream job, and create it.
And that's it. Another episode down, another episode in history. Episode 2 is officially a wrap, guys. So remember when I said before that I want this podcast to be as interactive as possible. So send me your reviews either through Stitcher. You could also send it to me through iTunes. Also, you can contact me directly on my Twitter account, Twitter handle at DocsOTB. That's at DOCSOTB. And if you also feel like there's someone that you want to nominate who you think would be a good candidate for the show, send me their information directly at docsotb@gmail.com. Also, remember, I'm also trying to start a movement, if the movement hasn't started already, for all of you doctors who want to be defined by something else besides just being a doc, right? So remember, there's that hashtag, I'm not just a doc, I'm a blank. Fill in the blank, send it to me, send it to my Twitter handle, and let's start a movement. So guys, we're done. But until next time, remember to always live outside the box.